The drums began long before the fire was lit, a steady low thrum that carried across the valley, like the heartbeat of the earth itself. One by one, the people gathered, their faces painted with ash and ochre, their eyes heavy with fear. Tonight was no ordinary night. The moon rose, swollen and red, hanging over the mountains like an angry wound in the sky. Every child was pulled close, every elder leaned on their staff, for they all knew something was coming. The fire at the center of the circle roared to life with a single spark. Its flames climbed higher than seemed natural, bending and twisting as though some unseen hand shaped them. The air smelled of cedar and sage, smoke curling upward to meet the crimson moon. Elders lifted their rattles, and the chants began low at first, then rising with the rhythm of the drums. Tayan. A young hunter seated at the edge of the gathering felt the hairs on his arms stand on end. The sound of the drums pressed against his chest, and his breath came short. He had heard tales of visions summoned by fire, of ancestors speaking through smoke, but he had never seen it himself. Tonight, the air was so heavy it seemed every word carried the weight of prophecy. The chanting grew louder. Sparks burst from the fire, leaping toward the sky like tiny spirits. The flames shifted, their colors deepening, glowing not just orange and yellow, but streaks of green and blue. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The smoke thickened, rolling and curling, forming shapes that were not born of chance. Within the smoke appeared shadows, mountains that cracked apart, rivers that turned to dust, an eagle circling lower and lower until it vanished altogether. And then came a voice, not from the elders, not from the drums, but from deep within the fire itself. It was the voice of the ancestors, strong and terrible, echoing across the night. When the river runs dry and the eagle no longer circles, a child must be given, or all will fall into silence. A silence followed so complete that even the drums stopped. The fire crackled, but no one moved. Children pressed their faces into their mothers' shoulders. Warriors who feared no man bowed their heads. The words hung in the air like smoke that would never fade. A child, no one spoke it aloud, but the thought screamed in every mind. Whose child? How could the ancestors ask such a thing? For generations, the people had given offerings of food, feathers, and prayers. Never had they been told to give flesh and blood from among their own. Elder Misu raised his staff, his voice hoarse but steady. The ancestors do not lie. We have angered the balance. The earth cries out. Only sacrifice can restore it. Mothers clutched their children tighter. Fathers clenched their fists until their knuckles turned white. Fear slithered through the circle like a serpent, wrapping itself around every heart. At the edge of the firelight, Tyone felt his stomach churn. His people looked to the elders for answers, but all he saw in their eyes was sorrow. He had believed in the wisdom of the ancestors, yet something inside him recoiled. Could harmony truly be restored by the death of a child? Or was there another truth buried beneath the smoke? The fire hissed and spat, throwing sparks high into the night. For a moment, the flames bent into a single shape, a small figure, fragile and dark, standing motionless in the glow. A child's shadow flickered in the heart of the fire, waiting. What would you do if your ancestors demanded a life for the survival of all? The flames twisted again, and the shadow did not vanish. It only grew clearer, its head bowed, its outline trembling in the smoke. The flames twisted into the shape of a child's shadow, waiting. The valley was a cradle of breath and memory, ringed by mountains whose white crowns caught the sunrise like old songs catching light. Pines stood like quiet guardians. The river went, it ran full braided through the meadow, and curved around the village like an arm around a sleeping child. Even now, thinner than before, it still sang to those who listened. The people said the river carried the voices of elders long gone, that its ripples spoke of what was coming if you were patient and humble enough to hear. The tribe rose with the first gray hint of dawn. Smoke from cook fires rose in gentle threads. Women brushed ash over the doorposts to remind the home to stay rooted. Hunters tied small feather bundles to their boughs, whispering thanks to the spirits of the animals they had yet to meet. Children helped carry wood, clumsy but earnest, giggling until a hawk passed and everyone fell silent to watch. When the hawk circled, it meant a message. When it dipped a wing, it meant attention. The people paid attention. Their dances were not for show. They danced to teach their feet the old paths, to shake the dust of anger out of their bones, to say we remember without using a single word. On days of plenty, they danced for joy. On days of drought, they danced for steadiness. The drum spoke for the earth. The rattle spoke for the rain. Smoke carried the petitions upward, sweet with sage and cedar. And the song slow and round belonged as much to the wind as to the people. Tyone had learned these ways at his mother's knee and his father's shoulder, but learning did not silence his questions. He was known for quick hands and a clear eye, the kind of hunter who could read broken grass the way some men read letters. Yet it was not only his skill that drew notice. Since he was a boy, dreams had pulled at him like the tide. He woke often before dawn with words he did not remember saying, and once he had known a storm was coming a day before the clouds appeared. The elders watched. They said, "Visions liked to follow those who walked the edge between courage and caution." Elder Misu, keeper of stories and keeper of names, called Taeon to sit by the council fire that morning. Misu's hair was silver and long, his hands steady even as age tried to shake them. His voice held the cadence of many winters. "You heard what the fire said," Misu told him, eyes on the thin river. "A voice can echo loud and still not be simple. The ancestors teach, but they do not explain. That is our work." Taeon nodded, feeling heat rise to his face. "I do not doubt them," he said, though doubt had curled inside him overnight like smoke that would not clear. Misu studied him, not unkindly. Doubt is not an enemy. Pride is an enemy. Fear can be an enemy. Doubt is a lamp. Use it to see more closely. He touched Taeon's chest with 2 fingers. "You were chosen to carry what others cannot. When the dreams come, hold them gently. Ask them to sit. Ask them to speak plain." The wind moved through the lodge skins with a soft hush, like a grandmother telling children to quiet. Outside, a pair of deer crossed the far edge of the meadow, pausing to stare at the village as if they recognized cousins. A crow hopped along the fence rail near Taeon's shoulder, turning its head to fix one bright eye on him. It cawed twice sharp, deliberate, and he felt the message in his bones, though he could not name it. Animals did not gossip. They delivered. Not all messengers were so polite. Sometimes the world sent lessons with teeth. That afternoon, as Tyone checked snares along the dry creek bed, he found small tracks layered over his own pads and claws. Wolf, moving light, moving silent, circling close enough to watch. He crouched and pressed 2 fingers to the print. A chill went through him as if the ground had spoken his name. "Weya," he murmured, because naming a thing you feared could turn it into a neighbor and not a ghost. The elders did not call Weya an enemy. They called him a tester, trickster. He tugged at pride and fear until they danced and tripped each other. He made sure you knew what you were made of, and if you did not, he taught you the hard way. By evening, the village gathered for the small ceremonies that kept the day stitched to the night. Bread was passed. A little meat lean and treasured was shared. The old women tugged warm blankets over the smallest children. Men checked arrows. Girls painted each other's cheeks with simple lines showing clan and story. Anami ran between the fires, her laugh like a bell chasing away the last of the dusk. She carried a strip of red cloth tied to her wrist and told anyone who would listen that the cloth kept the stars from slipping out of the sky. Taeon watched her and felt something knot in his chest. It was not only fear of the prophecy. It was fear that the valley itself was changing its mind about them, that the river's song would slow to a whisper. that the hawk would stop circling, that the deer would look away. He took a bowl of stew to Misu, who accepted it with a grateful breath. "Listen tonight," the elder said softly. "Not only with your ears, listen with your scar places. The dreams will come through where you have been cut, later." Tayan stepped away from the last glow of coals and faced the meadow. The mountains loomed black against a sky salted with stars. The wind whispered through the grass names, warnings, comfort, he could not tell. A fox barked once from the ridge, an owl answered. The valley did not sleep, it kept watch. He lay down on a bed of furs, the smells of smoke and pine in his hair, and felt the slow drift of drowsiness take him. Somewhere between waking and sleep, he heard the river change its song for a heartbeat, like a word caught on the tongue. In that caught note, he felt a gaze slip under his skin. The meadow faded. The lodge walls fell away. Snowless mountains stretched to the horizon, and a shape emerged from their shadow low gray, moving without sound. That night, Tayan dreamed of the wolf's eyes burning with a hunger, not his own. The drought deepened like a wound that refused to close. The river, once a silver ribbon winding proudly through the valley, thinned to a trickle that barely wet the stones. Fish floated belly up in the shallow pools, their scales dull as ash. The songs of frogs and water birds faded to silence. Even the wind seemed drier, rasping over the grass like an old man's cough. The hunters returned with empty hands. Where herds of deer once roamed, there was only dust. Traps lay untouched. The forest, usually alive with chatter and crackle, fell still, as if the animals themselves had abandoned the land. In the fields, corn plants stood stunted, their leaves curled and brittle, rattling in the faint breeze. The women ran their fingers through the soil and found it lifeless, hard as stone. Fear thickened in the village. At first, the people whispered their worries at night, around dim fires where children slept. Soon, whispers turned to arguments. Voices rose. Some said it was the doing of strangers, the pale-skinned men seen far to the east, their weapons strange and their appetites endless. Others argued the truth was closer to home. Taboos had been broken, rituals forgotten. The people themselves had angered the ancestors. "The children do not listen," spat one man, his face shadowed with despair. "They mock the old songs." "It is the hunters," countered another, "killing more than they need." "No," said a third, his eyes flashing. "It is the women who no longer weave prayers into their baskets." Blame passed like a torch through dry grass. Everyone felt the heat. Tayan sat apart, his jaw tight, his hands restless. He wanted to believe the people could endure, that the ancestors would guide them as they always had. But in his dreams, the wolf came again. Weo's eyes gleamed like embers in the dark. Its voice slid into Tayan's ears, smooth and mocking. "The ancestors lie. They always have. Balance is not restored by innocence. It is broken by fear, and fear makes fools of them all. Why should a child pay the price for the greed of elders?" Tayan's fists clenched. "You twist words. The ancestors have never lied." The wolf padded closer in the dream, breath hot on his face. "Then ask yourself this: why do they demand a child's life and not your own? Why do they hide behind riddles instead of speaking plain?" Its teeth gleamed in a grin. "They are not the guardians you believe. They are hungry, and they feed on your obedience." Tayan woke with sweat soaking his skin, his heart hammering like the drums. The dream left him raw, hollow, as though the wolf had stolen something from inside him. He remembered Misu's counseled out is a lamp. Yet this doubt burned too brightly, threatening to blind rather than guide. In the days that followed, suspicion grew like mold in the cracks of the tribe. Families who had shared food now sat apart. Fathers scolded, sons more sharply. The air of trust that had once bound the people frayed, thread by thread. Tayan felt it too, a creeping question he dared not voice. Was there betrayal within the circle itself? Had someone angered the ancestors by choice, hoping to profit while the rest suffered? Every rustle of grass made him turn his head. Every whisper between neighbors sounded like a plot. Even enemies' laughter, though softer now, felt fragile, like a candle flame trembling in the wind. He feared it would be snuffed out before anyone understood why. At night, he sat by the river's edge, listening to its weak murmur. He whispered prayers, but the water carried no answer. He asked the stars for guidance, but their light seemed pale, washed thin by the hunger of the moon. Would you trust the spirits? He whispered to himself, or defy them to protect the innocent? The question rang in his skull, heavier than any spear. At dawn, the people gathered for water, but what they found stopped every breath. The sacred tree at the center of the village, the tree where offerings were tied and prayers spoken, now bled thick red sap. It oozed from the bark and pooled at its roots, dark as blood spilled from a wound, and the tree would not stop bleeding. The bleeding of the sacred tree sealed what? Whispers and arguments had already begun. To the elders, it was no longer a warning, but a command. They gathered in the council lodge, smoke heavy in the air, faces lined with sleepless worry. Elder Misu sat in the center, his staff across his knees, his voice low but steady. The signs are clear. The ancestors have spoken in fire, in river, and now in blood. Balance will not return until the sacrifice is made. His words fell like stones into still water, each one rippling outward. The others nodded, though sorrow dragged at their eyes. When Misu lifted his hand, the silence grew unbearable. The child has already been chosen by the voices, Anamani, the child of light. The name echoed against the wooden beams of the lodge. Outside, the world seemed to hold its breath. Anami, whose laughter had once danced like sunlight through branches, no longer played as freely. She woke crying from dreams she could not describe. Her small hands pressed against her ears, as if to block out voices no one else could hear. Mothers whispered she was marked. Some fathers turned away when she passed, unwilling to meet her eyes. Yet to others, she was still only a child, innocent and undeserving of such a fate. The village divided like water striking stone. Some bowed to prophecy. Others trembled with anger. Tears flowed freely in the women's lodge, where mothers held their little ones tighter, their hearts breaking for Anami's mother most of all. Men sharpened spears and carried them as though expecting to fight, though no enemy approached. The true battle was within. Tyann felt the pull from both sides. He sat in the shadows of the council fire, his head low. He had watched Anami chase fireflies, her laughter carrying across the meadow. He had seen her give her only blanket to a shivering pup one winter night. He knew her heart was pure. How could the spirits demand this? And yet the ancestors had never lied. The drought was real. The balance was breaking. He walked to the riverbank, staring at its trickle of water, desperate for an answer. The wolf's voice returned in his dreams, its grin sharp, its words dripping like poison. Do you see, hunter? They offer the smallest lamb to shield themselves. Cowards, all of them. Would you kneel and let them slaughter her, or would you rise? Tyann pressed his fists to his eyes, begging for silence. But silence did not come. The preparations began as the sun fell. Songs were lifted into the dusk glow, mournful songs of farewell. Women painted their faces with ash, men with red clay. Elders drew sacred lines across Anami's small body, tracing her arms and forehead with white paint. Feathers were braided into her hair. She stood still, her eyes wide, her lips trembling though no tears fell. The people moved as though trapped between two worlds, one foot in grief, the other in obedience. Mothers wept openly, their wails sharp as knives. Fathers stood rigid, their jaws set, their eyes shining with unspilled tears. Children were hushed, pulled close, told to remember this night, though they would never understand it. Elder Misu raised his staff and spoke. Tonight, we mourn what must be given. Tomorrow, the sun will judge if our offering is enough. His voice cracked, though he tried to hide it. Tain single quotes S heart pounded like the drums that had begun again, slow at first, then building. Each beat echoed in his chest until he could hardly breathe. His gaze found enemies, and for a moment the noise of the village faded. Her eyes were too calm, too knowing for her years. She took one step toward him, feathers brushing her cheeks, paint glowing pale in the firelight. Her voice, when it came, was soft enough that only he could hear. Do not let them take me. The drums thundered, drowning every other sound. But Taeon heard her words as if the world itself had gone silent. The night lay heavy over the valley, thick with the weight of what was to come. Fires smoldered low, sending thin streams of smoke into the starlit sky. Most of the village slept fitfully, though no one truly rested. The drums had stopped, yet their echo seemed to linger in the chest, an unending reminder of the heartbeat of prophecy. Taeon sat awake, his bow across his knees, listening to the restless sighs of the people. He had not spoken since Anami's whisper burned itself into his heart. Do not let them take me. Those words haunted him, sharper than any blade. His gaze flicked to her family's lodge, where she lay under guard, feathers and paint still clinging to her small frame. A rustle broke the night, quiet but deliberate. Taeon rose, muscles tense, eyes narrowing at the shadows moving near Anami's lodge. A figure slipped through the doorway like smoke. Taeon's breath caught. He followed, silent as the owl overhead. The figure emerged with a bundle in his arms. Anami, still half asleep, her small face pressed against the man's chest. She did not cry out. Perhaps she trusted him. Taeon's hand shot to his knife, but when the moonlight struck the man's face, his heart nearly stopped. It was his cousin, Kiona. Kiona's eyes, wild and desperate, met his for only a heartbeat before darting away. He tightened his grip on the child and hissed, "Do not stop me, Taeon. She does not deserve this." Taeon froze, torn between instinct and loyalty. "You cannot," he whispered, voice harsh with panic. "The people will see this as treachery. The ancestors will curse us all." Kiona shook his head fiercely, tears glinting in his eyes. "The ancestors demand too much. If they are so powerful, let them take one of us, not her. I will not stand by and watch a child slaughtered for the mistakes of men." The words struck Taeon's chest like stones. He wanted to agree. Every bone in his body screamed to agree. But the weight of tradition pressed harder. To betray the prophecy was to betray his people. Behind them, a shout split the night. Guards stirred. The village erupted in confusion as torches flared and voices rose. Thief, betrayer. The people swarmed into the clearing, their cries sharp with fury and fear. Mothers clutched their children closer. Warriors raised their spears. Some shouted for Kiona's blood, others hesitated, torn by the same grief that racked him. Elder Misu stepped forward, staff raised high, his voice trembling. "This is rebellion against the ancestors. To steal the chosen child is to invite ruin upon us all." But from the crowd, another voice answered, rough with anguish. "Or is it courage, Elder? Courage to defy a command that should never have been spoken?" The tribe split before Taeon's eyes. Half called Kiona a blasphemer, half murmured agreement with his defiance. The air crackled with division, sharp and dangerous as lightning. Taeon's heart thundered in his chest. He moved between his cousin and the crowd, torn in two. Blood called him to protect Kiona. Duty demanded. He sighed with the prophecy. Anami stirred in his cousin's arms, her eyes finding Taeon's with a look that begged for salvation. He wanted to speak, to shout, to demand clarity from the heavens, but no words came. Only the roar of fire, the hiss of angry voices, the pounding of his own heart. Kiona's grip tightened on Anami. "Will you strike me down, cousin?" His voice broke. "Or will you help me save her?" Taeon's knife felt heavy in his hand. The crowd pressed closer, voices rising, the divide widening. Mothers wept, warriors shouted. The elders' chants began again, calling for obedience, for silence, for blood. Then the ground seemed to tremble. A wind rushed through the circle, sharp and cold, carrying a voice not human but vast, ancient. And furious on Taeon's ears it roared, drowning all else. Blood must be spilled before the sun returns. The sacred mountain loomed like a black tooth against the storm. Clouds churned above, restless and angry, their bellies glowing with the fire of lightning. Rain had not yet fallen, but the air carried its taste, metallic, sharp, like the edge of a blade. The people climbed in silence, their faces streaked with paint, their bodies wrapped in furs and feathers. Torches guttered in the wind, sparks spiraling upward like frantic spirits trying to escape. At the mountain's peak, a great fire had been prepared. Logs soaked in resin hissed and spat as the flames licked high into the night. Drums began again, thunderous and unrelenting, echoing the storm above until the sky itself seemed to pound in rhythm with the people. Anami stood at the center, feathers in her hair, her small body painted in white spirals and red lines. Her eyes darted, wide and fearful, but she did not cry. She had grown too quiet for tears. Elder Misu raised his staff, his voice quivering as he called to the spirits. We give what is demanded. We offer the life chosen by your fire, by your river, by your tree. Hear us and restore balance. The storm answered with a crack of lightning so bright, the world turned white. When the afterimage faded, a figure stood at the edge of the firelight. Low, gray eyes burning like coals. Wea, the trickster wolf. The people gasped, some falling to their knees, others clutching their children. The wolf's grin glimmered with cruel amusement. Look at you, it snarled, its voice carrying like wind through hollow stone, shaking like leaves before the axe. You give your own child to silence your fear. Does this honor your ancestors, or betray them? The elders trembled, their chants faltering. The people turned their eyes away, unable to face the beast that was more shadow than flesh. Only Taeon stared, his heart thundering as loud as the drums. Vision struck him all at once. He saw the valley cracking open, fire spilling from its wounds. He saw children starving, mothers weeping, warriors scattering like smoke. Then he saw another vision, the river full again, the eagle wheeling high, enemies' laughter ringing across the meadow. Both ruin and salvation, both betrayal and faith. Which vision belonged to truth, which to the trickster's lies? The wolf turned its gaze upon him. Hunter, you feel it, do you not? They bind you with chains of obedience. They will kill her to save themselves. Will you stand aside and watch, or will you break their chains? Taeon's knees weakened, his throat dry as stone. His eyes found Anami. She was so small against the storm, yet her gaze held his with desperate trust. He felt his chest split open. No, it was not her place to pay, not her laughter to silence, not her life to end. His voice broke from him, louder than thunder, fierce as fire. If blood is demanded, then let it be mine. Gasps tore from the crowd. Misu's staff shook in his hand. Warriors cried out in protest, but Taeon strode forward, his steps heavy, each one like striking stone with steel. The wolf laughed, a sound that rattled the bones of all who heard it. Yes, Hunter, show them what sacrifice means. Not innocence, but courage. Taeon climbed the stone altar, the fire's heat scorching his skin. He lifted his arms to the storm. Ancestors, if you truly guide us, take me instead. Let the child live. Let the people live. The flames bent toward him, as though drawn by his words. The storm screamed overhead, lightning cracking so close the ground shook. The people cried out, some begging him to stop, others chanting for the ancestors to accept. Taeon's heart raced, his body trembling. For a heartbeat, he saw Anami smiling, alive, whole. For another, he saw the wolf's burning eyes, hungry, waiting. Was he walking into salvation, or a lie dressed as prophecy? The storm held its breath as he stepped into the blaze. Fire roared around him, swallowing his cry. For an instant, his form burned bright, a figure of shadow and flame. As Taeyeon fell into the fire's glow, the storm stilled, and the child's shadow vanished into the night. The silence after Taeyeon fell into the fire was vast, so deep it seemed the world itself had stopped breathing. The storm froze above the mountain. The drums fell silent, every hand too stunned to strike. Even the wolf's mocking laughter faded into nothing, its shadow unraveling into the dark. Then, with a sound like a sigh from the heavens, the first drop of rain touched the earth. It was small, almost forgotten in the chaos, but then another fell, and another, until the mountain rocks gleamed wet. Thunder no longer split the sky, it rumbled low and gentle, like a great drum of approval. The clouds broke open, and rain poured down in sheets, hissing as it struck the fire. The flames roared once, then bowed low, curling inward until they were smoke and steam. The people stood frozen, staring at the place where Taeyeon had vanished. Nothing remained of him but the echo of his cry. Anami clung to her mother, alive, spared, her painted face streaked by the rain. Slowly, the elders lowered their staffs. Warriors dropped their spears. Mothers pressed their children close and wept openly, not from despair this time, but from relief. From release. By dawn, the river sang again. From the mountainside it spilled, fuller and stronger than it had been in many moons. Fish darted within its currents, flashing silver in the early light. The eagle circled high above, its wings broad and steady, its cry sharp as a blessing. Grass bent under the weight of water, drinking deeply. The land seemed to breathe again. The people followed the river down into the valley, their hearts raw and shaken. They gathered at its banks, their feet sinking into the softened mud. Elder Misu raised his hands, his voice breaking as he spoke. The ancestors have shown mercy. The sacrifice was never meant to be the child's blood. It was the courage to lay down one's own life for the people. Murmurs spread through the tribe, voices low with awe. They turned their eyes toward Anami, whose laughter had returned as sudden as the river. She splashed her small hands in the water, giggling as droplets glittered in the sun. To the people, her laughter was more than sounded, was a promise, a vow that life would endure. In that moment, they understood. Innocence was never meant to be silenced. The burden of sacrifice belongs to those strong enough to carry it, those willing to place the people before themselves. Taeyeon had given them more than water, more than survival. He had given them a lesson to carry into every generation. That night, they told his story by the fire, their voices trembling but proud. They spoke of his doubts, his dreams, his courage. They spoke of how he had stood before the fire and offered his own life when all others faltered. Children sat wide-eyed, clutching blankets as sparks rose into the night. Elders nodded, their eyes shining, as though they could still hear his voice in the crackle of the flames. Anami grew strong, her laughter never fading. She became a symbol of renewal. Her presence, a living reminder that the ancestors asked not for the destruction of innocence, but for the strength of the brave. When she laughed, the people remembered the river's first song after the drought. When she danced, they saw the eagle wheeling above. And when she dreamed, they listened. For her dreams carried the voices of those who had walked before. The tribe changed after that night. They sang their prayers louder, not from fear, but from gratitude. They offered more than food and feathers. They offered promises to protect one another, to stand as one when the world tested them again. The prophecy had not been punishment. It had been a riddle, one meant to show them the true meaning of sacrifice. And so, Taeyeon's name was spoken whenever the drums began. His story carried across seasons, across generations. His courage became their inheritance. His sacrifice became their guide. If history tried to silence this story, what other truths still wait in the shadows? Share this tale, so the ancestors' voice may never fade. And so, beneath the eternal sky, the people remembered, the river flows only when hearts are willing to give.